Day, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to We Love Guitars Workshop. I'm still Sam. This is after Christmas. Here we have a Thomas Blug signature guitar. Creaky, nothing happening tuners. This belongs to Stuart. Belongs to Stuart, and Stuart won it in a competition. Wow, that's quite powerful pickups. There's really thrumming this. Yeah, so this is a Vintage V6 signature Thomas Blug, and won it in a competition of sorts, and actually was presented it by Thomas Blug himself, who signed the back of it, which is there's usually the little signature on the front there. So this is a kind of quite a special guitar in that there's a bit of provenance to it, that's got a history. Anyway, it's the kind of relic version, including a missing tremolo screw, and a sort of scratched off paintwork, kind of, you know, relic look to it. Kind of deliberate but nicely done, I suppose. And it's got quite a big C-section neck, which I quite like on these vintage guitars anyway. I don't find them a problem, let's put it that way. They have a lot of very stratty tone, these things. I've never worked out, I never knew what this button here was for. I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Bit of research would no doubt tell me. Anyway, the point being about these things is I really like them. It's got the mint green pickup, pickguard, with a sort of yellowy greeny yellow finish to it. But I find that the tone on these is really stratty, and in the way that the Wilkinson pickups definitely are. I like them for that reason. They're kind of almost, the word I've used to describe them in the past is hyper-real. They're almost too Strat-like. So this doesn't work as a tone control at all. Maybe it does on the neck pickup. Okay, back to front, sort of, nearly. Well, weird. Anyway, look, this is it, with its sort of relic neck as well. The tuners are kind of rusty in places. I'm missing some light in here, I thought so. Tuners are rusty in places, which make them a little bit harder to operate in my book. You know, for what you get, which is the relic look. you know, beautiful sounding guitar. Well, the thing I noticed about this, of course, it's a 7.25 radius, so that's going to make bends difficult for, you know, the lower action. So Stuart's asked me to get this playing the best it can play within the limits of the 7.25 or 7.25 inch radius. Now, what I noticed for quite a high setup already, we're not getting bends that we might want out of it. So there does need to be a little bit of work. I mean, that isn't particularly low, or it's not massively low, and we're not getting, it's about 1.5. It's not hugely low. For that we should be able to get so we want to try and free that up. That's the main thing. So I think maybe a little bit of adjustment at this end, and yeah, just recover those bends for a reasonable action. So we've got about 2mm on the low E, which we can reduce as well, and we'll have a closer look at this in a minute. A little bit of relief, so it's not unduly low. Or little, I should say. Anyway, so that's the game for this one. Nothing too drastic. Just let's see if we can get those bends back out of the deal. Because I think at that sort of action, we should be able to do that. The other thing that Stuart wasn't massively happy with was the sort of roughness of the rosewood. So it looks like in part of the relicking process, looks like what they've done is, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, mind your ears, part of the relicking process seems to be to leave the board quite rough. Now it's possible to shine that up, but we obviously can't work long ways with the frets in, so we'd only really be able to work up and down the frets, which means quite difficult to get right into the edges of the frets. But I'll have a word with Stuart on the messenger a bit later on and see if he wants me to just sand these out a little bit. We could do it with a couple of grades, you know, sort of probably something like I don't know, 600, light 600, no, maybe even 1000, 1500, 2400, something like that, just to perhaps bring it to a bit of a shine. So but it's not impossible. But yeah, it's slightly difficult. It's easy when easier when the frets are out. So just a couple of quick measures here. I'll write them down as I like to keep a track on them. And while I'm there, I'll rub off a couple of things I don't need. Okay, I'm just thinking, what am I thinking? Yes, I was thinking, where's my video camera from there? But I took that with me up to my dad's house move. Okay, so on this end here we've got 2mm on the low E, last fret 2mm, last fret high E. It's not massive, it's just under 1.5. Last fret 1.4, let's call it. And then somewhere I have this thing. That's very little. I'd say it's about right, but relief, we'll call it about 0.1 mils. And then on the first fret action, we'll have a look. Sorry, not making it very easy to see. Obviously my target is about 0.3, which is, this is higher than that, but it's not massively higher actually. But it's just fractionally above on these lower ones, which I would take down just a little bit, but hardly any. But I would be concentrating on making sure that they were running smoothly. My slight concern about this guitar is the way the tuners operate, because of the relicking. They're very notchy. Now it's entirely possible to put some oil in there, which I think would probably be a good idea, because, or some grease I should say, because these things have been lovely. These things have been they've been relicked with water, and I think that's, or with some sort of solution that's created this rusty feel and look. So it's a little bit on the hard to operate side, harder than I would like. Anyway, so if we're going to do anything to the fingerboard, that will happen when the strings are off anyway. So what we can do at this point is head towards basic, getting setup action exactly as we want it. Now bear in mind this, we're not going to chase our tails forever here on the 7.25 radius. The geometry of a tight radius means that there's a limit to what you can do. Hear that creaking? I think that's a very good price to pay for relicking in my book. Anyway, yeah, so we'll get these first fret actions, last fret actions tweaked down a little bit. We probably find as we come down on that, the first fret action will also come down to a decent amount, so we might not need to make any adjustments there. So let's just take this down a bit. Sort of vintage saddles there, bent saddles. There's a 1 point. Should be able to work at about the 1.5 mark. And then similar. That's already kind of down in that zone. Okay. just tune it up again. Okay, so that's not a huge amount of adjustment, but I think the real challenge in this is getting the bends out of that action, which as I said isn't hugely low but not also massively high either. Sort of, it's about as low as I'd expect to be, expect to be able to go with this tight radius, relatively tight one. I think it's 7.25 from memory. Now what I want to do when I'm at it is just knock off some of these strings, and just I'm going to mark the frets preparatory to leveling, and I've got some new sandpaper on my leveling file, which will make it cut quicker and cleaner. One of the things I have to notice or watch out for on these Wilkinsons is their lettering on their single coil, well actually on all their pickups it seems. Some of the metallic lettering comes off really easily, so when you come to polishing out you have to cover those over and make sure no masking tape or paper or anything sticks on them, because they will just pull the lettering off and you'll be left with incomplete words. They really are stiff, some of these tuners, but kind of you wonder if they couldn't have done the relicking bit and then assembled them, you know, with the outer cases being relicked but the internal bits not being touched by whatever the solution is that they use. I don't know what it is, so I can't sort of say, but I think judging by what looks like rust, it has to be water based, so which I don't think the gearing probably likes very much. I could be wrong, but I don't think it would hurt to have some grease in there. I'm not sure if we can get any into there. Don't want to chuck regular oil in because that's too liquidy, a bit messy. Although they do have oiling holes. Okay, so here are the frets marked up, and here's the guitar ready for fret leveling. And let's get our freshly papered up device and we'll go straight at it. Now the objective of this is to free up those bends on a high ease, and the bends are choking off in the middle, so it's as they come towards the middle of the neck, which is part of the challenge of the geometry, because in a sense they're starting to push uphill at that point, so we have to be realistic about what's possible, but we know that it's not playing them right now, so we'll do our best. And I have got the 7.25 in the house, which is the crafted in Japan Telecaster, which is a 7.25 and also does play the bends. I've got it just leveled to a nice degree. What bird song going on out here? So what I'm doing is I'm just lining up the tool here. Somebody asked me on YouTube yesterday, did I ever take this tool and calibrate it against a known level, for example one of those notched rulers that I've got over there, and the answer is of course no, because I never used this as a straight edge. This is always used in this slightly curved mode, And I think the thing to say is if you can't get your head around what that mode is and does. By the way, I'm leaving these for the second. Am I leaving them for a second? It doesn't really have a bearing, but I need to just revisit them because they're sitting a little deep in the slots there. I'll do it at the end. Yeah, so if you're somebody for whom this idea of leveling with the frets, the neck curved and the strings under tension, then it's hard to separate out the thinking. You know, you often think in terms of this flat edge and how do I calibrate this against a flat edge. It's quite difficult to get your head around. Now, the point is both the neck and the leveling beam in this method are both curved. Now, as far as playing, all the notes are playing on that E to begin with, and in a way that's usually not the challenge. The challenge is the levelness of the next two tracks. So I'm going to be very careful and aim to ensure that both the B and the G are beautifully levelled. Yeah, so getting your head around levelling with a curved thing it takes a bit of rethinking if you're used to doing it the other way. But I recommend trying it at some point, you know, even if you don't continue using it. And some people also think I'm kind of obsessed with it being curved for the sake of it. Okay, it's playing the first two bends, okay, or the first bending into the B space. Yeah, some people think I'm obsessed with doing it curved for the cuteness of it or whatever, but it isn't. The only reason I'm leveling with these two things, the neck and the tool curved, is because I have to if I want to do it with the strings on. And the only reason I'm doing it with the strings on, as I explained to somebody on YouTube, is twofold. First one is it's the only way I can level and check this way with the strings on. So this allows me to set the action I want and then level to meet it. This is critical, this G track now. This is the bit where the unevenness is stopping the bends previously. So I really want this to get this right. But anyway, yeah, so the first one is the only reason I level with a curve in it is so that I can do this method of leveling with the strings on, which means I can stop and check to find out the point at which the action I've chosen starts playing, and then at that point I can stop, so I don't have to do anything more. So I've almost freed that up. We had no bends there at all before. Now you can hear, I don't know if you can rewind the thing and look at right at the beginning, the bends that I was getting nothing out of, now we're getting them because of this leveling. So I'm going to do a little tiny bit more in this track, just to be sure, and then move on, and we'll come back to it and play it again when I've done all of them. But what that little bit of careful leveling has allowed, it allowed the strings to bend across into the G track, the high E string into the G track, and that's doing this leveling has given us just enough clearance for that note to ring out, whereas it couldn't do it before. So that's the benefit of doing it at all. But as I say, this method is the only way I could decide when to stop and just move on, is exactly as you just saw. It's by playing it trying out the bend and saying, yep, we've got it, don't take any more metal, we don't need to, we've got the guitar bending at this chosen action. And it is the only method I know to be able to do that. Other methods, you have the strings off and you're basically trying to aim for an arbitrary and understandable all over low levelness, which you tend to measure a different way, and that's usually by use of a fret rocker. So you're checking the absolute levelness between three different frets each time, and when you have no rocking or almost no rocking, what you then know is you've got a relative levelness between those three frets, and you keep on moving on and all the way up until you've got it. Okay, now this I've also seen before, by the way. I've seen strings break on relict tuner posts, which is another slight downside of the relicking process, and that's broken up here. That's because the thing gets a bit rough. Could probably do without that. Okay, well, that's that sorted out. That's that conked out. Let me just check what the gauge was, because I've got a spare somewhere I can use. I didn't want to. I have to break up a set now, an old set. I think it's looking like a 9.5. Sorry, a 9. Yeah, technically, I could carry on and just finish these last two without putting another string on here, but I'm going to, just for precision's sake, just to make sure the loading's the same. And this is just going to be, I've got a spare one kicking around that's easy to find, because I'm not going to go and pull out any from a new set. Well, there is one on here, but that then kind of renders the whole. Oh, maybe I could, that can be my replacement set. I always like to have one sacrificial set of strings hanging about ready for action. Unfortunately, this one just came off one this morning and was being kept for that purpose. Anyway, yeah, so there you go, breaking strings on bending, which is not normal. So I kind of can't help but suspect the roughness of the tuner. Now this is a little bit tricky because this has got a curly end on it and it's catching onto the other strings and holding on. So I'll try and get it out without getting totally locked up. Thank you. And then the other way of doing this is threading through. When you've got a curly bit of string, you can use a bit of the shrink wrap or something to kind of push it all the way through, if you can. Maybe cut off the very end hook if there is something, but that's not too bad. So push that through, and then we can stick that up through the block, if it will behave itself. This one doesn't want to do it. Normally I can get that up through. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take off this final spike, which doesn't want to play ball. Now, I'll try it as is. Tremolo blocks on Strats are very difficult for threading even slightly bent strings through. If you can get a tube like this through the block, if there is enough room, which might just be actually, yeah, this will help, because what you can do is push it right the way through, thread your wire into it, your string I should say, keep on pushing and it comes out the other end, and then pull the whole lot out. There you go. And you might just have enough length on there to go up to the tuner. Just. There you go. So we'll put this on and do it up for the purpose of our fret leveling. This is actually a slightly bigger gauge, but it won't make any major difference. Ah, what's that doing now? Okay, that popped through the base of the block, which it can do sometimes if you don't get it on perfectly in the first place. Kiddies. Right, kids. They're playing Nerf guns. Nerf guns. No doubt, Christmas Nerf guns. Right. I'm not allowed an argon, mates. Anyway, okay, so now I'm ready to do the next bit, so I'll just calibrate for the A, and then the final calibration for the low E. Okay. Yes, so if you kind of haven't got your head round the idea of leveling in this manner with the neck slightly curved and the tool slightly curved to match it, then not using a notched straight edge will seem pretty odd, and I can understand you keep sort of wanting to refer back to it, but it's not something that I use because it's not necessary in this method. Got a low fret up there, the last fret, 20th fret is low, making 21 high, so just pay that a tiny bit more attention, see if we can eke it out a little bit. Effectively just concentrating on it a little bit to give it what I suppose you could call a bit of fall away or something, but we just want to clear that last little bit of relative highness. It's not really high, but it's relatively high due to the previous one being relatively low. So that should be alright. Yep. And then calibrate for the low E. Somebody also asked a little while back to talk about if I could talk about the different settings, and I tend to avoid, you know, like first, last fret and stuff like that, and everybody has their own way of doing it and everybody has their own preference, and I tend to avoid talking about it because I don't really want to be prescriptive about it, because it's a personal thing or a subjective thing. So I can tell you what I tend to aim for as my start point, and it's pretty simple. I aim for a 0.3 over the first fret on all strings, and I aim for 1.5 over the last fret for the low E, and close to 1 or 1.2 for the high E over the last fret. So I want to go down a little bit of a gradient on the last fret action if I can. Sometimes it doesn't permit it, perhaps like this guitar might be one because of the tight radius, so I may end up with 1.5 to 1.5. I think we'll get a bit better than that, but so this one I always try to make the point about is not thinking of it as an absolute. So if I say 1.5 on the low E last fret, what I mean is given the amount of curvature in the neck that we've already checked, which is a 1.2, which is right in the middle of where I like it, or right on the lowest, the least I like it, something like 1.1 to 0.2, somewhere between those two is a good target. This is about 0.1, so I'm happy with that, and I pretty much do it by feel. I can see there's a bit of room, it's not a lot, and I can sort of guess how little it is from experience. So 0.1 to 0.2, something like that, of neck relief. 0.3 over the first fret for all strings is my preferred target, and 1.5 down to about 1.2, 1.3 on the high E, which may, as I say, on a tight radius like this be slightly different. So there's no, it's not an absolute, it's always it always has a little bit of variation in depending on the other factors. So how somebody likes it, for example, if they don't want an ultra low action, you don't aim for an ultra low action. If it's a 7.25 inch radius, you can't go as low as if it was an SG, which is a very flexible neck, very responsive, but also has a 12 inch or sometimes higher radius all the way down, which is relatively flat. So you can get lower action on all strings and retain the bends on that. So there's no point just saying, you know, here's my absolute numbers, do exactly like this. It's much better that you understand what I use the numbers for, which is only a start point, and then experiment away from that yourself. Now, that is on the bridge just before the middle of the G, so I'm going to look at that G one more time, and I'm going to go back and recalibrate just to make sure I'm going to have the tool where I want it. Never take it for granted that it's the same. This calibration, or the curvature, the relief in the neck changes as you go across the radius sometimes, so it's quite possible to have a different one here in this strip than it is in that strip. So that's why I regularly recalibrate before I do anything, just to be sure. It's tiny amounts, but I like to be sure. So now I want levelness here, so I'm just kind of concentrating on that area right up to the crown of the frets, top of the hill if you like, and beyond, so that we've got as good a travel for that bending high E and B as possible, right the way up to the top of this hill, so that there's absolutely no unevenness possible. And that pretty much is where I'll stop, because I don't think I'm going to get any better than that from this point. Yep, we'll take a tiny bit more off when we do the polishing out anyway, so, but it will be very slight. But on a 7.25, that's as low as I'm going to go. We've dropped the action just a tiny bit from where Stuart had it, a little bit more on the bass side, but now we've got it working as well as it will play. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove, where did I put it? I'm going to remove, here we are, remove these strings. Yep, remove the strings. I'll keep these as my next set of sacrificials. And I'll get rid of the dust off the fingerboard. Sorry about the noise. Okay, yeah, and I'll have a quick word with Stuart then about what he wants me to do with the fingerboard. You can get it to various states of smoothness with different sanding grades, and also with what do they call that stuff? What do they call it? God, you know, micro mesh. That's the ones I was looking for. Yeah, so you can get different grades, micro mesh, and you can get quite a shiny finish. But we shall see what Stuart wants from it, but we can go quite a way on that. I'm just going to pull out these old strings and park them off to one side for reuse. They are they always try and catch as they come out, so to be able to reuse them we have to put up with them hooking onto just about everything actually. Sometimes it makes more sense to straighten them out first before you try and get them anywhere near through the body. Sometimes you can just pull them through. As long as they're not connected to the other strings, they'll come out pretty easily. But they will need to be straightened a little bit to get them to play again as sacrificial strings on the next guitar, or the next strap style guitar. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this one's got a little hook on it, I'm going to do the re-crowning bit here, and just do all the frets, re-crown them, re-profile them I should say, and I'm going to use marker pen to do that. And once I've done that, then I'll have a check with Stuart and I'll go off camera. The nice thing about this setup method is that it's the hard work, or the complex work, or the precision work is done really. It's in getting the setup right to begin with, even though until you do the fret leveling you can be fairly confident that the guitar won't play very well, because it's going to wait for you to effectively make the frets sort of play ball. So we make the frets comply with the action we've chosen, as opposed to with the other way around, which is very familiar. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the flattened frets and I'm using this file to take off the sharp shoulders, if you like, of the flattened part, and to reshape it into as close to an arch shape as possible. And that's the shape that's ideal for playing, and it's good for intonation, because if it's flat, what happens is the intonation point starts at the front edge, or that edge, bridgewood of the flat spot, which if it's very flat can be as much as 1 millimetre or even 2 sometimes out of position from where we really want it, which is at the sort of centre of the middle of the fret. Centre of the middle, yeah. Centre of the fret. So to make sure that intonation point is in the right place, we have to go and take off the flat spot, and that's what we're doing here. But doing it in such a way as to avoid putting any further, or changing the relative heights, changing the heights relative to each other. Okay, so that's that done. I'm going to hang this up for a minute, clean up, and check out the fingerboard issue. But having said that, point I was making is that the precision bit's done. So what we can now do is basically we can put the once we put the next set of strings on the same gauge, the neck will return to the same loading and configuration that we had it a minute ago, and if it was level a minute ago, it will return to being level, relatively level, when we load it again, and so we don't have to do anything clever, we just return it to where we want. Even if the action's been altered, we need to mess around with the bridge, we still know that we can get down to that low setting, that low action, because we've leveled for that action. So even if in between somebody comes and maybe raises the bridge a mile, we can still comfortably or confidently go back to that 1.5 and 1.2 millimeter action, because we know that we've leveled for that. Okay, see you in a bit. Happy New Year. It is 2019, the year of new stuff. Yeah, 2019, ladies and gentlemen. Where's my thing? Is gone. So, welcome. Anyway, since I last saw you, what have I done? I have basically smoothed out this fingerboard a bit. It's a funny material. It's roasted maple. I've tried to darken it because as soon as you sand any of it, it comes up quite light. So I've tried to oil it back down. It's also got some splits in it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's in the wood, but it doesn't help the feel, I suppose you could say. Anyway, so here we are. We're ready to restring this with a Super Slinky Ernie ball set, and this is going to be done with the tremolo still locked down. So we're just fairly straightforward restring. So yeah, first day of the new year, and I'm getting this done now so that it's ready to go back. Let's get this right. Ready to go back tomorrow. I've got 2 more leaving tomorrow. So everything's done. The fret leveling's done. Just now need to get it restrung, intonated, restrung, stretched, and intonated. And 9s. So, usual thing I have to mention around the stretching is to, regardless of whether it's actual stretch in the string or whether it's stretch in the what I call the string train, which is the path of the string including the posts, the tuner posts and the tremolo block. Either which way, it doesn't really matter where the slack is stored, we have to stretch it out because that will be the source of any tuning instability. So it's crucial to get that out, and I think what's surprised me when I started doing this a few years ago, was just how much slack there is in that string train, and how much it plays itself out over time. Right, there was something I was going to do on here that I haven't done. Right, let's have a feel. Oh God, these don't feel good at all. I was going to get my little container of grease and just put a little into these tuner holes here. See if we can get it. I mean, I guess this normally takes a liquid oil, but it won't hurt if it's grease as well. This is a nasty. To do that, look at that. That's got Wilkinson Deluxe, but look at that for a relic. I don't know how well you can see this. That's a horrible way to treat a tuner. Look, that's really rough. Like I say, I don't really like putting liquid oil into things like this because I don't want it running out all over the shop, so I'm sort of going with the grease, and I don't have a tiny grease gun thing, so I'm just hoping this will absorb a little bit of it. I wonder if I do I have a pipette or something that I could push some oil in, grease in. Anyway, yeah, it's gritty, and I suppose I could I get in? No, I don't want to take these apart because they're basically, you have to bend a tab to get them apart, and that increases the risk of any damage. So I don't suppose it's going to make much difference at all. That's just so loose, that's kind of not funny. Anyway, I'm just going to try and push a little bit more in. See whether this will help. I'm back to front, so it's a bit hard to see what's going on. There you go. It's not ideal. I suppose it is a bit geared up for liquid oil. Like I say, I don't want it running out over the wood. So I prefer a bit of grease if we can do it. That's not actually not too bad. That is distributing it, believe it or not. But yeah, they really have messed up these tuners with this relicking process. I mean, that's just really loose. And it's not the case that Wilkinson tuners are normally like that. They're not fantastic tuners, but they're not at all bad. You know, they're often a really good, decent quality upgrade. But this, whatever the process is, involving some sort of water or liquid and rust process, I think, isn't what I'd want to do to them personally. Certainly not for a cosmetic payoff. Doesn't seem to be a very good deal. But there you go. That's what they do. So this is a bit of a slow way around, but it does draw in a little bit of the grease into the hole. So we are getting some sort of improvement in the feel of it, but it was horribly sticky before. You can actually see the rust coming out if I poke this around. So it's, you know, it's really, whatever the relicking is, it's gunged that up in a bad way. Right, so I'm just going to wipe off the excess on the back of here. There you go. So just a little, hopefully a little improvement on the action. Right. So I'm going to make sure first of all that the ball is all the way up into the block. That's kind of critical. Oh god, this feels awful. So I'm going to cut this before I wind it on too much further, so I can get in there. So I use the same old wind on technique, which I've done for a few years now. Pull back a fret's worth, wind it on, hold the taut string, go over the loose string first time round, and then under the loose string the second time round. And just before it goes round, trim it down to the base. And then here we go again. This one, make sure it's up. So now I'm leaving that. I can't remember on the Thomas Blugs whether or not that missing tremolo screw is a feature of the relicking finish or not. I'm going to assume it is. I can't remember from the other one I set up. Now let's just cut that before we go round. This one, on this post, the hole is right down the bottom, so it's not actually that easy or possible to get underneath the cut string stump, but we'll try. Just as a bit of extra locking. Okay. So 2019. Going to be an interesting year. I mean, which year wasn't, basically. So I don't know about you. I'm not very big on the resolution thing, although I do like to stop and review. I think that's a pretty good thing to do. And with We Love Guitars, I think I'd like to have a couple of mornings to sit back and think about where we go next and what to do. But yeah, I'm definitely not a resolution setting person. If I'm going to do something, I'll kind of plan to do it and set about it rather than wait for January the 1st to come round to do it. Right, come here, you. So yeah, so no actual New Year's resolutions for me, but probably in the next week or two, make some time to think through where we're at and what I can do with what I want to do with We Love Guitars more than anything. Right, so here we have the guitar strung. Get rid of the papers. Okay, so I'm going to do the first bit. I'm going to stretch out. I don't know how well you can see. I'm going to stretch out the strings themselves. Yeah, this fingerboard, Stuart wasn't happy with the feel of it. It did feel very dry and rough, almost like a cork surface or something. It turns out that it's probably rose acer, they call it. Well, that's what Thomann calls their stuff, or Harley Benton calls it, otherwise known as roasted maple, I think. And if you start to sand it down, it tends to start to lighten up, which obviously you don't want to do. So it ends up taking all of the colour off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, while I'm here, I'm going to do the double checking of these, what do you call them, nut slot heights, because they were a little bit variable. They're close but a little bit off, so I'm just going to drop off these two, and I'm going to make sure that they're eased out so there's no stickiness, which I can achieve, hopefully, or I can help, by a little bit of widening here, like that, with the triangular file, and then in the groove, just a little bit of a widening there as well, just to make sure it's good. Now this is working with the original plastic, which so far has been performing fine, so I'm never too keen to pull out a nut unless it's malperforming, underperforming, misperforming, you know what I mean, going wrong. It's a bit harder to work with, that's my main drawback on plastic. But it's, if you're careful, it's workable. Okay, so really I'm just concerned about the widening, just to make sure there's no gripping and sticking. These are pretty much nearly spot on in terms of string height anyway, I just want them not to stick. I think this one is probably the one that's higher than the others. So just kind of a bit side to side to widen it, and double check for string depth or slot depth, and then use this to drop it down a little bit. Amazing how much difference this excess height at the first fret can make, so it really does make a difference to get it down to a nice low action, which is nearly there. I'm working off the 0.3, which is my sort of target usually. Okay, that will do me. These off, and the G almost there. Just about on the mark. So it's just very small adjustments to get it as close as I can to how I want it, but also to make sure there's no gripping of the string as we tune it, and that will keep the tuning stability. We want the tuner, even though it's a bit clunky, we want it to pull the string through the slot in a very linear and direct way, and for that the slot has to be cut to the correct depth and wide enough as well, the correct width, so the string moves cleanly through it. Okay, that's good. Final one. I'll do nicely. Excuse me. Right, all done. So let's do another stretch while we're at it. So this is all aimed at getting as much of the slack out of the string train as possible, so that once you start playing it, certainly when Stuart gets it back, it'll come out of the box pretty much closely in tune, depending on whether the tuning knobs have been touched, but it'll go into tune straight away and stay in tune for, you know, minutes on end and potentially hours on end when you get all the slack out. Now, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. You have to do some pulling around, and it's a mixture, in my experience, of stretching like that, but also other kinds of stretching, including string bends. Now at this point I'm listening to the nut, and I'm listening and feeling the way it tunes. I'm listening to hear any pings that represent the strings catching, and I'm feeling whether it's tuning directly as I'm turning it or in jerky sort of stages. So I'm going to double check the string actions now before I do some more stretching. But what I'm aiming to do next is, when I'm close to stretching out, I want to then check the actions, reset the actions, and then end up by intonating, making sure each string is the correct length for this neck. Okay, so action, got my thing, yep. Okay, so this is very low, and that's very low, and that's very low. So let's just make tiny corrections, only very slight. This is a 7.25, so we don't expect to get the lowest, so I really shouldn't be going for anything under anything under 1.5 at the bass end. Anything else is too hopeful. We wouldn't expect to get decent bends out of that. And then I think we should aim for going down to sort of 1.3ish, maybe 1.4 on the treble side. Yeah, that's down on 1, so that is a bit too low for a 7.25, I have to say, but it's a nice target for doing the fret leveling. At 1.2, and that's a little under. This tuner is hopeless. Horrible tuners. Sorry, Wilkinson. So that's all that was a pretty low setting. That's 1 point barely over 1, so I'm going to go up a little higher because we wouldn't expect to get that low on a 7.25, so I don't want to start off artificially low. So that's probably a bit, it's about 1.3, 1.4 for starters, and that's a bit low, so we'll do a similar. There's 1 point, same, a little bit low. I think that's about where it should stay. Okay, there we have it. At its kind of optimum action. So the next thing to do to get this finished is to check the intonation using the tuner, which I shall do. I would recommend, honestly, replacing those tuners. They're too sticky for my liking, thanks to the relicking work that's been done, which is a shame, really. But anyway, personal choice, but to me it's a little bit down the list of important things, but it's still slightly annoying. Right, let me find a screwdriver for adjusting the intonation. Okay, so what we're looking for is to play the open E harmonic at the 12th, and then play the note, fretted note. We want them to be the same. Now of course this varies because everyone's fretting pressure varies, but it tells me it's the note's a little flat, which means the string's fractionally too long. So we'll check the next one. That sounds about right. Fractionally long. Fractionally long. So far that's on. D and A are okay. See, it settles. So B and A are okay, and the rest are a bit long, so I'm going to go on the high E, I'm going to go counterclockwise and shorten it a bit. On the G, I'm going to go counterclockwise and shorten it a bit. On the D, I'm going to go counterclockwise, shorten it a bit. A seemed like it was okay, and the E was close to it as well. Let's try that again. There you go. Yep. Push that forward a tiny bit. Here we go. Okay, so a little bit of polishing to do. There's a bit of dust on it from earlier on, or yesterday, whenever it was, on the edge there. And then we're ready to go. So that's that. 7.25 inch radius Thomas Blug, hand awarded, given to Stuart by the man himself. So it's got a special significance, this one, but despite that, it's a nice vintage looking thing with 7.25 radius, which tolerates a reasonably low action, a pretty low action considering actually, but it is ultimately slightly constrained by what you can get it to do because of the geometry of the neck. Okay, so anyway, there we are. V6 Thomas Blug. Not a bad looking thing. I do like these. I would happily play these all day long, methinks.